Good evening, everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to episode 129 of Into the Outer Realms, titled The Dangers of False Disclosure. I'm your host, Joey Medea, the interstellar traveler, taking you into the outer realms where the paranormal and the supernatural are just the normal and the natural. And that is the debate. That is where we are at right now. Things are happening. I know just several weeks ago, I had Reverend Carter here and my esteemed colleague, Craig Ansell, both of them very wise, do the research, show up. Reverend Carter, very well connected, knows a lot of people who are connected to people on the inside. And we had a great discussion about disclosure. We took you through Senator Rubio and the Senate Select Committee, the DIA, sent them information. We kind of went through it page by page, talked about it and all of that. And right after that episode, Reverend Carter sent me a document, an article. That was the end of July. About 3 weeks later, there was another important story that broke, and all the talking heads, some of which I'm going to talk about tonight, started making the rounds to coincide with the release of this information about an upcoming budget bill and what that means. So I have a couple of different goals for tonight after we run the opening. I'm going to take you through, I've talked about a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight over the course of the past several years on this show, on other shows, a little bit in our books, and my forthcoming book, Parallels and Patterns, my lifelong quest for answers. This is really the soul of it, is to pull as much data as I can, put it into timelines, put it into tables, and look at it and look for those patterns, look for proximity. Now, that's what I'm trying to do. So let's roll the opening. When I come back, I'm going to take you through this, starting, believe it or not, I was going to start in 1947, but based on this week's research, I'm taking you back to 1939, and we are going to track this together tonight to see how we went from the first government explorations in the United States of these phenomena. UFO, UAP. UAP is going to mean something different now. We're going to talk about that. It's all very confusing, and a bit of a 3-card Monte or shell game. So welcome. Super glad you're here. And here we go.
There exists a realm beyond our wildest dreams, a realm beyond reality that the gatekeepers and guardians have always told us consists of nothing but tricks of the eye, weather balloons, swamp gas, sand cranes, fairy tale myths of monsters, crackpot conspiracy theories, and desperate cries for attention.
We know this realm exists, and it's just beyond the horizon. The preset path, the well-worn walkways where the cynics want us to stay.
Instead, give this a listen. Put on your headphones, adjust your volume, close your eyes, and fasten your mental seatbelts, because the twilight-tinged turnoff from reality's alluring highway is looming just ahead.
We're about to leave the plane of the easily explained, couldn't possibly be's, and the no way I just saw what I saw's, for the spaces and places where everything is possible, and if you stay long enough, even probable. We're about to take a journey into the outer realms.
Okay, so I want to try to keep this to about an hour tonight, or maybe a little more. You've all been very patient. We've been doing 90-minute episodes. I mean, the guests and the discussions. My brother Craig Ansell is here with me. We're really excited about Sinister Mysteries. It's gotten off to a great start. 3 episodes. We're going to be doing Templars. We're going to be doing Roger Bacon. We got really cool stuff coming up. We're going to do the prelude to MK Ultra. MK Ultra was very popular with the audience, brought up a lot of good discussion, as it always does wherever I go. And we're going to talk about the Nazi programs and the Japanese programs during World War II that were the precursors to what became MK Ultra. So we're excited, and we're just getting started. Next year, I think, is going to be phenomenal. So let me say hi to everyone. Like I said, Craig is here with us, which is awesome. Michael, hello. Michael NCL will be with us October 6th to talk about the shadow. And the week before that, I'm going to do archetypes to sort of set it up. So it'll be a great contributor discussion. Lori's here. Lori and Tanya will be with us on November 17th, doing some special audience appreciation readings. That's going to be exciting. Hello, Jessica. I know Mark is here. I don't want to forget anybody that I saw who said hello. So, okay, so let's dive right in. This starts now, and I'm going to go kind of quickly, but you could always go back and watch. Craig and I are going to find ways to get you our show notes. So we're working on some structures to do that. But this starts with a man named William Mills Tompkins. And he wrote a book. It was called Selected by Extraterrestrials, My Life in the Top Secret World of UFOs, Think Tanks, and Nordic Secretaries. Pretty awesome. Two men that need to get a lot of respect are the editors, Robert Wood, who I believe is a doctor, and Nick Redfern. Nick was nice enough to write a back cover blurb for Tanya and I's Watch Out for the Hallway. Nick is highly respected when it comes to MIBs, men and women. He did a very interesting take on Roswell, did a very interesting take on Rendlesham Forest. Rendlesham Forest plays into some of this data that we're getting. Are these things real? So much data, including our own government, are starting to say yes. That is good news, but we have to be careful, and that is what this is designed for tonight. So that book is available. Now, William Mills Tompkins died in 2017. Yes, he was very advanced in age because he was at the center of all of this in World War II. So let me take you through this. He was at the Battle of Los Angeles. UFOs over the city of Los Angeles firing is very odd. That was February 24th, 25th, 1942. He worked for the defense contractor TRW. TRW is the one that Steven Spielberg featured in Close Encounters. We've done shows on Close Encounters. We're weaving a quilt here. Just remember that with this show. Nothing random here. And if Close Encounters was based on a real thing, Solar Warden, which I'll also talk about tonight, then that TRW becomes very, very important. Now, when he was a young man, he had a knack for engineering. That was his thing. And he was creating these scratch-built models of U.S. Navy ships. And he was displaying them in various stores in Hollywood. Well, the government confiscated them. The gun placements and radar placements were so accurate, it was a threat to national security. So was this guy hooked in? Was he great at research? Was he a genius? Maybe a lot of different kinds of things. He worked for North American Aviation. He was selected by the Navy before high school, before he started high school, to someday work for them because of these models that he had done. And he had done a lot of engineering in his career. In 1950, he was with Douglas Aircraft Company. He advised Werner von Braun, head of NASA, came over through Paperclip. Remember all this. We're building trails here. Hello, Charles. Always good to have you with us. Hello, Harlan. Hello, Mona. So here's where it gets interesting. This is why we now chunk back from 1947, which was my thing, and I had to put a prelude on it. 1939, America finds out that Germany has a secret space program. They have rectangular shape. They have the wing shape, the flying wing, as they called it. They have the saucer shape, and they have the triangles. They have them all. So America, through the United States Navy, has a spy in Germany, come back and reports this to a man that I talk about all the time because he's so at the center of this early stuff, and that's James Forrestal. James Forrestal is Secretary of the Navy at the time. So he goes to his unnamed superiors, and he says, look, we're getting this information. What do you want us to do? They say, well, you need to put together a group, a secret group to study this. They need to be in Germany. Whoever heads it up has to be Navy. but they can't have gone through Annapolis. So they wanted someone high up enough in the United States Navy, but not necessarily an insider organizational guy. Maybe because if it went public or something went bad, this was someone that they could burn, without losing too much sleep. I don't know. That's just me trying to put the story together. So they find a man named Rico Botta, Rico Botta. His family immigrated here from Australia, and he heads up the program. He's a commander when they select him. He makes rear admiral. Okay, so he has this group studying everything. Then suddenly in 1942, we have this battle over Los Angeles, right? There's one in Washington, D.C. too. There's some interesting theories about that I'm going to talk about. But what they're finding out from 39 to 42 when the Battle of L.A. happens, that there are two ET groups that the Germans are working with. They're working with the Nordics, and that's probably through the transmediumship of Maria Orsic, who Craig and I talked about as part of the Nazi occult. She was channeling, she was writing in the Sumerian language. Years later, a farmer in Norway thinks they saw her in her guise as a Pleiadian. So Maria Orsic may have had a walk-in, or may have channeled, or may have been a bilocate. I've spoken to at least one person who says that they're here on Earth, yes, but they're also on a mothership, and possibly a psychic mothership out in space at the same time. You hear this enough that you can't just dismiss it out of hand. So it's a data point. So the Nordics are the one side, and of course the infamous Draco reptilians. They're the satanic bloodline. A lot of very powerful families. There was just a big death today. A lot of these families, some people whisper that they're tied to these different lines going back to the Draco reptilians. The Draco reptilians were supposedly here almost from the beginning. I don't know if it's tied into the Anunnaki with Sitchin. There's said to be as many as 5,000 of them living under in the geothermal heat caverns under Antarctica. Phil Snyder talked about Dulce Basin battles with these things. There's various treaties I'm going to talk about tonight. Again, it's data points, folks. Chad, hello. Our good friend Chad Pitt, he had a birthday yesterday, so I'm going to say it again. Jaron, who's joining us, says, I love all reptilians. And Reverend Carter says he had an encounter with a reptilian, and it was perfectly fine. So again, white hats, black hats, good guys, bad guys, we are story. Humans are story, and we've been telling the same stories and all of that. So there's that. So here we go. So they do this debriefing. It takes place on North Island, just off of San Diego. San Diego, of course, big naval base there. William Tompkins says that they have photos, that they have manuals, a couple of manuals. Some of them are in German, and some of them are in ET languages. That's what this man, again, William Tompkins, in this book, Selected by Extraterrestrials, edited by two credible people, Robert Wood and Nick Redfern. This is what they say. So the United States starts to get these drawings. So Tompkins is designing spaceships that are a mile long, and the lore says that they took attack class submarines, U.S. attack class submarines, and retrofit them for space. And they selected submarine crews that are used to being away from their families and in confined spaces for a very long time. They understand the protocols. They understand secrecy. What's very interesting now is UAP is unidentified aerospace undersea phenomena. That's the government and Department of Defense. That's what they're calling UAPs now. Up until last month, it was unidentified aerial phenomena. So this is all of a piece. So reptilians under the ground in Antarctica, underground bases, under the water. None of this is completely too far afield, and also using an attack class sub to go to space. So this is the lore. That Northrop, which became Northrop Grumman, were doing elongated tic tacs. And as you'll see with all of this, there are some people who are saying that the Tic Tacs, the Go Fast, the gimbals that we have these very blurry images of might be American super weapons. And that plays into it too. So this is just getting more and more and more complicated. Now, the Germans supposedly have these Hanabu, which is the bell. Craig and I talked about it a little. Is that Kecksburg? Is that other stuff? Then they have these flying wings and these flying saucers. Is that what Kenneth Arnold saw outside of Mount Rainier? These 9 saucers. Were they German flying wings? Were they something that America then was testing because they got it through the Germans through paperclip after, Rico Botta's group dove in and got all of this stuff? We don't know. But that is June of 1947. Kenneth Arnold has his sighting. Then Roswell is in July. More possible crash saucers, possible bodies. Were there bodies at Roswell? Well, remember, I think it was 1970 when Richard Nixon took Jackie Gleason to Homestead Air Force Base, showed him the bodies. Totally shaken up. It wasn't until after he died that his wife even mentioned this. So why would she mention something like that? Jackie Gleason, a very credible actor, very highly respected. Why get into, and by the way, Nixon showed him bodies? It doesn't mean that it's true. It doesn't mean that any of this is true. But they're data points that we need to look at. What else was going on in 1947? Well, in January of 1947, and we've talked about this on our Red Thread Collective Antarctica show, was Operation High Jump under the command of Admiral Robert Byrd, but of course overseen by Secretary of the Navy, still at that time, James Forrestal. They take 33 ships, 5,000 men, and 13 airplanes. They have equipment for looking at underground spaces, hollow spaces, and Byrd takes it to Antarctica. Now, when the Nazis first started going to Antarctica around 1938-39, Byrd was supposed to go. FDR wanted him to, but when the war started, of course, that expedition was scrapped. Okay. Byrd said some very interesting things. And again, some people have tried to debunk this. He says that he was in his personal airplane. Okay, so he was flying an airplane, in other words. And for 3 hours, that plane was hijacked by German-speaking Nordics. Okay, German-speaking Nordics. That's a data point from the 1970s, that farmer in Norway that saw Maria Orsic as a Pleiadian and said that she was speaking Bavarian German. So we at least have a little overlap here. We at least have more than one data point. Well, anyway, the story goes that they returned 5 months early. Okay, so they came back in the early summer. This is right around the time that Kenneth Arnold is seeing these 9 saucers by Mount Rainier. Roswell is July. They come back and they are beat up. Byrd says, we are lucky we got out of there. The only reason they didn't decimate our fleet was because they let us go. And the lore says that it was a combination of aliens or ETs, whatever, probably Draco reptilians, and Nazis. Okay, so there you have it. This is a lot going on in 1947. And we maybe could leave it at that until you really start to find out what's going on in 1947. Government. The government reaction is massive. They create the CIA. They create the Intelligence Act. Forrestal moves from Secretary of the Navy to Secretary of Defense. It's logical because Forrestal, if you go with all this lore that I'm sharing and setting up here, he knew about the German UFOs. He knew about the attack in Antarctica. He was already so inside. I think in a lot of ways, Forrestal was inside in the level that George Bush Sr. was on the inside. So, let's see here. Let's just catch up really quick in the hello, Sharon. What's the meaning of this Thursday live anyways? You're throwing me off, Craig. Oh, I'm not sure here. That's okay. So that's a conversation there. So sorry about that. So what goes on here? The upshot is that Forrestal in 1945 had also gone to Germany. He toured some Nazi facilities. Who was his very special guest? John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy in 1942 went in the United States Navy as an ensign and was part of the Office of Naval Intelligence. The Office of Naval Intelligence, to this very day, is at the center of this UFO study, almost not to the exclusion of everyone else, but they are at the forefront all the time. And with this new legislation, there's something very, very interesting that's coming up. Hi, Ronald. Thanks for joining us. So here's what happens, and I want to take you through the Forrestal thing. In 1949, Forrestal falls, as you know, after, yelling out loud, the aliens are coming and there's nothing that we can do about it. The government puts him in Bethesda Naval Hospital for psychiatric treatment. It's decided that he can go home. The night before he goes home, his brother's going to pick him up and take him home. He falls out or jumps out of a 16th floor window. Okay. 1963, 30 May, JFK visits his gravesite. This is kind of interesting. And I thought it was sort of random. Why, 6-7 months before he dies, does JFK go to Forrestal's gravesite? Well, I just found this out yesterday and I shared it with Craig, so he knows. Forrestal's son, Michael, was the aide to McGeorge Bundy, who is JFK's national security advisor. So here's Forrestal, who, some say went crazy and threw himself out a window, but here's his son, a very accomplished lawyer in JFK's inner circle, where JFK was a guest with Forrestal in his tour of Germany. So kind of painting a picture here. I'm seeing some wow faces coming up. I think there's going to be a lot of wow moments tonight. Here's another one. November 12th, 1963. This is 10 days before JFK is assassinated. He orders the CIA director, McCone, to investigate Majestic 12. And I'm going to get to Majestic 12 because it's one of these things tucked into the UFO lore that is very, very controversial. So I'm going to get to that a little bit. JFK toured the concentration camps with Forrestal after the war. Yeah, he was around Potsdam and also Nazi establishments. Yes, as well. Yeah, Charles is saying as an aide, he was an invited guest, as some people would say too. So we don't know if it was in an official capacity or not, but he was there at Forrestal's request. Let's say it. Okay. This new iteration at the time of MK Ultra, if MK Ultra existed, had a leadership change, and it was now under Allen Dulles, former director of the CIA, whose brother John Foster Dulles was Secretary of State. Dulles gets fired after the Bay of Pigs, which is April 20th, 1961. What happened then? JFK didn't want to pull the trigger. CIA was angry at him. The military establishment felt humiliated. That whole thing was a mess. JFK is getting very distrustful of the CIA, thinks they have their own agenda. And so he fires Dulles. He fires two other guys. One of them is named Charles Cabell, Cabell. He's a brigadier general. Before he was deputy director of the CIA under Allen Dulles, he was the director of intelligence for the United States Air Force. He is the man who authorized Grudge and Blue Book. So you might have to go back and watch all this. So Forrestal gets this information about the UFOs. He brings in JFK. JFK has Allen Dulles, who may be Majestic 12, certainly is very connected to the hot buttons in the government and government subterfuge and all that, CIA and all the rest in the early days, where it was really that first 15 years was an absolute free-for-all, trying to kill Fidel Castro and Che Guevara and overthrowing governments in the banana republics. Just crazy, because the Dulles brothers were principals along with the Rockefellers, and the Rockefellers come up in all of this. It was Nelson Rockefeller who supposedly started the second iteration of Majestic 12, Nelson Rockefeller, also a principal in the United Fruit Company. That's where banana republics come from. And these guys are in the center of U.S. power under the Kennedy administration, and they're overthrowing governments and owning 65% or more of the land in Central America, and keeping people under poverty conditions while they're lining their pockets. So now, Charles Cabell, right? Former USAF director of Intel, started Grudge, started Project Blue Book. He goes on to be deputy director of the CIA. He gets canned with Allen Dulles 10 days after JFK orders McCone to look into this mysterious Majestic 12. He is killed in Dallas. Who is mayor of Dallas? Earl Cabell, Charles Cabell's brother. So if these are just coincidences, they're hell of a coincidence. That's all I am going to say. All right, so Kennedy, during this time, made a speech. And I think that this speech, I've shared it with you before, because everybody talks about Eisenhower warning about the military-industrial complex, and I'm going to get to that. But Kennedy makes a speech for the American publishers, and I have the date somewhere here because it's very, very important. I apologize. I think it was also in May at that time. Here it is. It was April. So April 27th, 1961, this was. This is 1 week after the Bay of Pigs debacle. 1 week after the Bay of Pigs debacle, Kennedy addresses, you can go find it. You can hear him deliver this speech. The American Newspaper Publishers Association. He says, we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. That is what we were talking about in the disclosure community right now. All of those things, probably light on the diplomatic. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised, silenced. No expenditure is questioned. No rumor is printed. No secret is revealed. No expenditure is questioned. We're up to about $6 trillion of missing money from the Department of Defense. $6 trillion. The day before 9/11, so about 21 years ago, it was, I believe, 2.7, 2.5, something like that, 2.4, that Rumsfeld was talking about. And then where the audit was going to happen in the Pentagon, that's where 9/11, that's where the plane, as they say, went in. And that's a discussion for another time. It conducts the Cold War, in short, with a wartime discipline no democracy would ever hope or wish to match. Kennedy is obviously talking about the same way that Eisenhower was. He's talking about a government within the government. And who has been controlling the UFO, UAP, whatever you want to call it, flying saucer narrative, going back to 1947. Yeah. Oh, right. And missing money, too, Jaron says, from the Oklahoma bombing. So, again, parallels and patterns, definitely questions that, we should be asking. All right. Now, this is where, oddly enough, this is where I was going to start tonight. The name game, shell game. Okay. 1947, all this is. So I said, in September of 1947, after Roswell, after Mount Rainier and Kenneth Arnold, after all the other stuff that I told you about, CIA is formed, first SecDef, right, Secretary of Defense, which is, again, James Forrestal. 1947 is supposed to be the founding of MJ-12, Majestic 12, these 12 men. Nathan Twining, who's U.S. Air Force and did a lot of the subterfuge and misinformation for Roswell. Hoyt Vandenberg, who they named an Air Force base for. All these guys were supposedly involved. Vannevar Bush, which causes some confusion, no relation to the Bush boys of Texas. Okay, so 1947, all of this happens. So then what becomes Project Saucer, well, that's not a great name, Saucer, what? So it becomes Project Sign. They look at 250 cases. In 1949, it becomes Project Grudge, started by Charles Cabell, U.S. Director of USAF Director of Intelligence, Deputy Director of CIA, brother mayor during the Kennedy assassination. 1951, it becomes Project Blue Book. Then in 1953, we have our first whitewash panel. So a group of scientists under a guy named Robertson, it's called the Robertson Panel. Nothing here to see, folks. No evidence of anything. This is your temperature inversions. This is your Venus. This is your glint off airplanes. This is your swamp gas, all the stuff that Tanya and I talk about in the opening to the show. That's where they came from. The Robertson Panel makes an interesting recommendation. Debunk all you can. This idea of UFOs is dangerous. It could crumble society. So this is going back to 1953 with that. 1951 was Blue Book. That's J. Allen Hynek. At first, he was debunking swamp gas and all of that. By the end of it all, by 1970, Hynek is going, no, there is something real here. Francois Truffaut plays Jacques Vallée, the famous researcher who will definitely tell you that these things exist. And J. Allen Hynek makes a split-second cameo at the end of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He wasn't just hanging around doing a cameo. He was the chief advisor on that project. So Blue Book from 51 goes up to 69. And then there's the Condon Committee. I believe it was out of the University of Colorado. The man was Edward Condon. They said we looked at 12,600 cases. 701 of them are unexplained. Stanton Friedman always said that number was BS. It was much higher than that. But the government's going, yeah, there's these things and we probably can explain them and it's probably all good. And Roswell was a weather balloon and, people are confused. That was really supposed to be the end of it. Up until only a handful of years ago, that's what everybody thought. Blue Book was it. It was done. UFO doesn't, they don't talk about. Clinton wanted to know. Carter wanted to know. Reagan wanted to know. They weren't told anything. Although there's a weird story that Carter goes to see CIA Director George Bush and really kind of presses him. Bush tells him something. No one knows what it is to this day. But a witness said that Carter went back to his desk, put his head in his hands, and he cried. And that seems to be the meat of this thing. That when presidents are told a little bit, it's so overwhelming. And they so believe that it's going to ruin society and people are going to stop, paying their taxes and religion's going to crumble. There are people that are pushing forth that narrative, and that's where all of this is heading. Okay, let's keep going here. JFK's mixed speech was that year, it was in 1961, when the National Air and Space Intelligence Center was formed. So now we have another government organization. Blue Book is still loping along. They're winding up to the Condon Committee. But in 61, National Air and Space Intelligence Center. That organization has gone through 6 name changes. It started at Wright-Patterson, and it wound up at Fort Meade, NSA. Tanya knows about that. Then we flash forward a little because everything gets quiet. And if you say you saw a UFO or anybody talks about it, scientists, professors, documentary filmmakers, everyone is laughing at these people at this time. But 1980 is the supposed start of Solar Warden, a secret space program funded by the SDI program. Remember the Star Wars initiative, or to shoot missiles out of space from lasers and all that kind of stuff. 60 some SDI scientists and employees died under very specific suspicious circumstances. So maybe it wasn't SDI. You come out with this sort of crazy idea, but they throw tons of money at it, and that money actually gets used for the Space Force. Again, I'm not saying that it's out there, but we need to look at it because part of Solar Warden is these long cigar-shaped ships. That was the kind of thing that William Mills Tompkins was designing in the 1950s. So 30 years, 3 decades to get it right. First class attack submarines aren't really going to get the job done. We need something built for the purpose. We're working on reverse engineering. It could very well be. Well, in 2007, as we now know because of the New York Times, which I don't think it was a leak. I'm just going to go out and say it. I think it was purposely planted. New York Times and other newspapers have worked. It's basically cooperation for access. If you want to get into the press room, you got to play ball. Quid pro quo. Sometimes I do for you, sometimes you do for me. I really think that they wanted to get this out there in 2017. It was the first step of this real disclosure narrative that they're pushing. Not real as in genuine. I think it's false disclosure. The Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, headed by Lou Elizondo, who was the one who outed it. He and a former deputy director of intelligence, Christopher Mellon, walk out of the Pentagon using some kind of loophole to bring out the Tic Tac, Go Fast, and Gimbal videos. All right. So, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program outsources a lot of its stuff to Robert Bigelow, the billionaire, who had Skinwalker and had NIDS, right? Discovery Science, National Institute of Discovery Science, Colin Kelleher, who did a book on Skinwalker that I find very disappointing and kind of a whitewash with George Knapp, because Bigelow keeps all of it under lock and key. It's proprietary. I am not sharing anything. Many of you know that several years ago, he sold it to Brandon Fugel out of Utah, real estate magnate. There's 3 seasons now, I think, of Skinwalker Ranch, and they've revealed some stuff, so it's certainly better by comparison. Okay. So supposedly this thing ended in 2012. It was started by Harry Reid. Robert Bigelow was the outsourcer, both fellow Nevadans, of course, right? It had a budget of $22 million to study these things over the 5 years. It comes to a close in 2012. Lou Elizondo is frustrated with government lack of disclosure, and so he outs it to the New York Times. Okay. 2020, we have the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force. Okay. Then we have in November of 2021, the Airborne Object Identification and Management. That was clunky. It didn't go over great. The Airborne Object Identification and Management. Okay, so what are we managing? Are we managing the information? Are we managing retrieved crafts? What exactly are we managing? All right, that goes away. Don't invest too much in that, because in July 20th of 2022, only a couple months ago, we have the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. What are we resolving? Are we resolving the anomalies? That's great, but where's that data? What anomalies have been resolved? We want to know. Then in August of 2022, just last month, which kind of precipitated this episode and all these different talking heads going around and talking about all this, there is a major change. For the first time since nothing to see, folks, since 1947, although we're seeing plenty, we have another organization, and it's yet to be named. because this is all about the fiscal defense budget and demands that Congress is making. And I'm going to get to that. I do want to tell you, it's hard to find out about who's in charge of these things and all of that. But the 2020 Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force, this was headed by a man named Sean M. Kirkpatrick. I'm assuming Dr. Kirkpatrick because he's a physicist. He's also an intelligence officer. He had a fellowship in the United States Navy Research Laboratory. So again, we're back to the U.S. Navy always. But his resume is very stout. United States Air Force Research Lab, NRO, which is the National Reconnaissance Office, CIA, and the CIA DIA. DIA is Defense Intelligence Agency. He was the division chief of a joint operation between the CIA and the DIA. And this is the person who's heading up the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force in 2020. So there you go. Woo! Okay, so what does Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, what do they do in 2017? Now they're public, now they're out there. Well, they hook up with Tom DeLonge of Blink-182, love the music. Tom professes to have seen UFOs, and he started this To the Stars Academy. Now you get some very big names involved. Harold Putoff at Stanford Research Institute in the 70s and 80s was with Ingo Swann and those guys doing the remote viewing stuff, the the Patty Hearst stuff and finding the downed Russian plane and all the really famous the Russian stuff, and also Ingo Swann looking at the moon and seeing structures. In a couple of weeks, we're going to have Constance Victoria Briggs on in 2 weeks, Encyclopedia of Moon Mysteries. Can't wait. It's going to be an awesome follow-up to our Red Thread Collective Moon Mystery one. So one of the goals, the stated goals, is an electromagnetic or gravimetric vehicle. That's one of their stated goals, which is To the Stars Academy, the science. All right, Chris Mellon, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under Clinton and Bush. He's involved. Of course, Lou Elizondo's involved through WikiLeaks. No matter what you think about WikiLeaks, they're giving us some clean data, not redacted and all that kind of stuff. Tom DeLonge is sending emails to Podesta. We got a good group of people. We really want to bring you in. Remember, the Clintons were very interested. Lawrence Rockefeller put out a report. They tried to get something done. The U.S. Air Force came back and said that people were remembering the year because they were crash test dummies that landed at Roswell. Well, Roswell was, I think, 4 years before we were doing crash dummy tests, 3 or 4 years. So there you go. That was so Podesta. Now, did Podesta answer the emails? Well, in January 2016, there's supposedly an email where Podesta invites Tom DeLonge and a descendant of General McCausland, who was heavily involved in all of this stuff, to a meeting. So the secretary is setting up the meeting. What's going on here? To meet about Roswell. And McCausland was, of course, involved with all of that. So there you go. Then To the Stars keeps promising big stuff's going to come out. And Harry Reid and Hal Pultoff and all this stuff. And big stuff's going to come out. And then on George Knapp's show, remember, another Las Vegian, Bigelow. George Knapp is important. I've listened to his show and like him in his show a lot. He broke the whole Bob Lazar story. And Bob Lazar gives us so much credible stuff about reverse engineering and S4 and Groom Lake and all of that kind of stuff. He was the one who broke that story. So on George Knapp's show, Lou Elizondo says, listen, they're focusing on entertainment. We want to do politics. We're leaving. That's in December 2020. So kind of much ado about nothing in a way. Meanwhile, just prior to that, a year prior to that, we have the Space Force, which has a logo that is Star Trek meets ancient Egypt. Now they've kind of gone through a new iteration. It's sort of still that Star Trek sort of thing, but a little more triangular now. And the Air and Space Intelligence, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence has the Sphinx sideways, mysteries. We're uncovering mysteries, intelligence, all that kind of stuff. If you look at, and Craig did our banner this week, so you can go out and look at it. It's there. It is the head of the Sphinx on top of the planet, dominating it, and it really looks like something out of Stargate with a star right above it. So, are they hiding stuff out in the open? I mean, the space program, all those different kinds of things. Hi, Howie. Thanks for joining us, my interstellar traveling co-brother. Okay, in December 4th of 2020, Chaim Eshed, high up in Israel, says that, yeah, guess what? These things exist. Now, he was kind of ridiculed. People said, oh, the poor guy. He's former head of Israeli defense minister, but he's on in years, and the article was translated poorly, and it's not what he said, but he had up the space directorate. He might know. He's a brigadier general. He was a professor in Israel, and he said that we had cooperative agreements, treaties. Also, former defense minister Paul Hellyer from Canada has said we have treaties. Eshed said we had underground bases on even Mars, so that becomes part of that whole 20 and back thing and the whole Mars missions and Solar Warden and so forth. There is supposedly a book that Warner Braun wrote about missions to Mars, and he says it's going to be headed up by a guy named Musk, M-U-S-K. Go figure that, and that various experiments were done. So this really ties in with the S4, with Phil Snyder's thing, with Dulce Base. Now we have Canada. Now we have Israel. And we have from other places. Look at the work that Nick Pope has done out of the defense ministry, talking about these things forever and forever and ever. Okay, October 20 of 21, where do Mellon and Lou Elizondo actually land? They land at something as research affiliates called the Galileo Project. This is headed up by a guy named Avi Loeb out of Harvard. And if you go and you look on who's the panels and all, Gary Nolan is there. I'm going to talk about him in just a little bit. Jacques Vallée is there. Nolan and Vallée are close. And this is where these two guys land. Okay. Now, how about the name game and all of that kind of stuff? Flying saucers. That's what we called them. Then there were UFOs, unidentified flying objects. Then Hillary Clinton was somehow involved. I believe it was UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. As I've said, I break with some of my colleagues about UAPs. If you think of the light worms, you think of the orbs, which I've personally seen on a couple of occasions. I've seen possibly one or two nuts and bolts UFOs, certainly one with Tanya over the highway in West Virginia a number of years ago. But I've seen these orbs, and I've seen them during the day, and I saw one go right through chemtrails, which was very, very odd, sitting right on the back porch here at the Creative Cottage a couple years ago. So I thought unidentified aerial phenomena was very cool. But now UAP, again, is unidentified aerospace undersea phenomena. That second U is silent. Excuse me, going too fast here. So I just want to go back now, and I want to revisit MJ-12. This was a story that I believe broke in the 80s. It's highly, highly controversial because the stakes are very high. When you have names like Vannevar Bush, James Forrestal, Nathan Twining, and Hoyt Vandenberg, who is the chief of staff of the Air Force and the director of Central Intelligence at one point, and you have these guys on a special committee that's really concentrating on this stuff that CIA Director McCone was supposedly investigating 10 days before JFK dies. Make of it what you will. But, you know, Rockefellers again. Supposedly Nelson Rockefeller in the 1950s restructured and put Alan Dulles in charge of MJ-12 as MJ-1, the number one spot. Okay. Now, we get to 1955, the middle, right? Eisenhower's warning us about the military-industrial complex, a topic from another time, and I delve very deeply into the timeline and all, Eisenhower's disappearance, a weird trip to the dentist and all. Apparently, he disappeared in California in 1955 and signed something called the Greada Treaty, Greada, which was an agreement with extraterrestrials. Okay, Joey, come on. We're off the res here. Remember what the Israeli defense minister said. Remember what the defense minister of Canada said. Treaties, deals, underground bases, all of that kind of stuff. So there you go. So I just wanted to take you through that and all of that. It seems like, and there is a great granddaughter of, I believe her name is Lauren Eisenhower. And she says what her grandpa was talking about, and more people are agreeing in that military industrial complex speech, was that here we are 10 years on from the Nazis coming over, darn near 10 years through Operation Paperclip, and they had infiltrated the corporations. Warner von Braun, who hung people from cranes while he was developing the V2 rocket. I talk about it all the time because please don't forget it. This is the guy that started NASA and said some very provocative things about aliens. That the V2, like Craig and I said on the Nazi occult episode, that the V2 was a jump in technology that only could be accounted for by help from aliens or from up there or higher intelligences or whatever else he said. Now, all this advanced tech, where is it? This reverse engineering, the stuff that Bob Lazar was talking about, these gravimetrics things, the electromagnetic propulsion, anti-grav, all this, whatever you want to talk it in the technical and the slang terms. This stuff has been suppressed. And I have to thank Stephen Greer for putting this, I think, the most eloquently. He says, quite frankly, the Tesla car, and other people are saying it too. I came across it over and over this week, and I'd love to know your guys' thoughts about it. It's wrong to call that electric car a Tesla because it's a lithium battery, terrible for the planet, and the electric that makes those cars run is still being produced by fossil fuels and old technology. So it doesn't even deserve to bear the name Tesla. And remember what Tesla went through. Tesla was trying to get us free tech, and JP Morgan famously said, if you can't meter it, we don't want it. If you can't charge for it, we are not interested. And that's where Thomas Edison took the whole darn thing over. In the 1990s, there was a guy named Stan Myers. He created an energy cell based on water. He died under very mysterious circumstances, saying that he was poisoned after a lunch. He went outside and he collapsed and he said, I have been poisoned. And I will tell you a personal story. I have to leave out the names. But this was in 2004. I had a student at my school, my acting school, and her family had to leave abruptly and go into hiding somewhere in the Midwest because her father had designed an engine, the end product of which was potable water. And they had to go into hiding. This is way worse than the climate change. Why? Because energy runs everything, more than pharma, more than some of the other big ones that have a stranglehold on everything is energy, and they're not ready to give it up yet. A lot of people are coming in on the side of Tesla. That's exactly right. It's a misnomer. It should be called the Musk, right? So again, thanks Stephen Greer for that. Remember too, and I've talked about this before, but I'm putting it all here in one tidy place for y'all. Tesla was living at the New York hotel. He died in January of 1943. They went in, the U.S. government, because of national security, and we kind of hate that is allows a lot of evil to be done, and I am not the only one saying that. The boxes are taken by an MIT professor for analysis of the schematics, the documents, the patents. Who is this guy? John G. Trump, Trump. Does Trump sound familiar? Yes, because this is the uncle of President Donald Trump, who is also pushing for, different conversations about energy and all different kind of stuff. John G. Trump looks at Tesla's work and says, there's nothing of value here. The guy was kind of doddery. He's kind of a kook. It's not workable. It's not, oh, okay, that's interesting. They think the hotel was the second tower. That's interesting, Howie. Thank you for that. If anybody knows more about that, feel free to talk about it in the chat room here as you're listening here. But really, and again, Greer and his people, I watched a fascinating documentary, Above Disclosure. Just came out this year. You should go ahead and watch it. Greer is controversial. Everybody's controversial. I'm probably going to wind up being controversial, and not in a good way, because I'm just a little guy pulling data, doing his research. I don't know any real insiders. I'm not hooked into, but the data is out there, and I'm pulling it and I'm stringing it for you. And here we go here. But civilization, if you think about it, in the energy center has not progressed in 100 years. That's interesting, considering transistor radios to cell phones, which are mini computers, forget it. Now we're in virtual reality, every other kind of stuff, wireless, Bluetooth. How much of all of this, and Craig and I have talked about this quite a bit, is reverse engineering, right? Fiber optics, all that kind of stuff. You can, it's topics for other time, so I can keep moving on here. Nearly 5,700 patents have been seized in the name of national security. Okay. Guys like Stan Myers are working on a water cell batteries on the local news. You can go out and look up the footage for Stan Myers. He's on his local news station because he's done this cool way to run his dune buggy, and the Department of Defense are showing up and asking him about his work and offering him contracts and every other kind of thing. So there you go. And then he supposedly falls outside a restaurant and says, they poisoned me. This stuff is super dangerous. And when you look at the stymieing of progress in the energy sector, Greer and his people are just so right. So what the heck is the agenda? What the heck is going on here? Well, disclosure, the way they're pushing it, is about fear. Keep you afraid and keep the money coming in. These documents that we went over for you the other day, it's right here, Appendix B of Les Velez's book here. Unclassified from Office of the Director of the National Intelligence, right? Totally marked up here. We already took you through it. We got this document here. Really nothing but lies and saying these things are a threat. They're invading our airspace. They're dangerous. We need money. Give us money. Please, please, please. We need some money. So what else do I want to tell you? So here's what I think is the major danger of false disclosure, which I'm calling this false disclosure. This stuff that has been coming out is false disclosure, and it's dangerous because it's creating a fear agenda. But the record does not bear that out. These things have been coming around for 80 years. And what damage have they done? What damage have they done? Now, the whole abduction, hybridization thing, on Thanksgiving, I'm going to replay a show that Craig and I did on hybridization about a year ago. These are dangerous things, and people have suffered. And Tanya and I personally know people who have suffered in this realm. Our experience was not pleasant, but it wasn't, it's hard to define, and you know that. And the record is out there. We did a whole show on it about our own experience. But there has been talk for a really long time about something called Project Bluebeam. Okay? Project Bluebeam is supposedly a false flag attack using hologram technology, laser hologram technology, which I do believe exists, to show us either Jesus or UFOs and aliens. Now, what's interesting about this is that Werner von Braun had mentioned wars are going to be fought over ideology and nationalism. Then they're going to be fought over religion. Okay, that was the whole terrorist thing and the whole everything that's gone on in the Middle East and Al Qaeda and the Islamic State and all that. So then you have these religious wars. We had plenty of those prior, with the Crusades and all of that. I'm wearing my always have my Templar stuff. That's October 13th for Craig and I, by the way. But the Crusades there. But I spoke to Paul Davenport, who's the head of Newfork. I got to talk to him one night before we went on air as a guest on somebody's radio show. And he was talking about, he's talked to many military people who have had nuclear submarines, certain aspects of them shut down. And then there's this very interesting story that becomes very timely. A man named Robert Salas, Salas, and I spell all this for you so you can go out and do your own homework. Robert Salas, March of 1967, and he testified about this to a congressional committee. He was a first lieutenant in the United States Air Force stationed at Maelstrom Air Force Base in Montana. They saw a glowing red orb over the base and 10 Minuteman ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, serious hardware at that time, at any time, are shut down in sequence. Okay, and we've heard these things. These are warnings. These are warnings from Papa that we don't like your toys. We don't like your slingshots. We don't like your homemade rifles, and we can shut them down. So behave. Behave. That's the message. That is not a message of aggression. Not really aggression. They haven't fired the missiles. They haven't detonated the missiles and said, well, that's just a little taste of what's coming. So this whole fear thing is super subject. So we're just at the 1 hour mark. I don't think I'm going to keep you past 1:10. I just want to put this up, what Jennifer says here. They have been with us for centuries and they've never left. Yes. And some people say tens of thousands of years, like the Draco reptilians or the Anunnaki that Sitchin talked about in ancient Egypt, ancient Samaria, Babylonia, going way back, but certainly, yes, probably here with us for centuries, predating us in certain places, certainly makes sense. Okay, so I think we did our show on July 26th, right around there, the Reverend and Craig and I, about disclosure. It was a wonderful discussion. The audience was involved, and it was wonderful. So the Senate, and this is from Liberation Times by Christopher Sharp, 26 July 2022. I'm not going to read you the article, but the title. The Senate's Intelligence Committee criticizes Pentagon as UFOs exponentially increase. Interesting. Whilst making clear that a new office will not investigate man-made objects. So they're going to put time, money, expertise, and personnel into a brand new organization to study something that, what? They've said never existed. But suddenly now it does exist. That's the only logical thing, unless these guys are going to sit in a room and do absolutely nothing because nothing exists. So this is interesting. So I already told you about the name change for UAP. Congress has officially expressed its displeasure with the DOD's slow progress. So this is basically in a nutshell. Congress, Rubio, the Senate Select Committees, the two of them, they're both going, enough now. You're playing games with us. You're not fulfilling your agreements. We said we would give you money. You're not giving us the info. So everything, that's what's happening there. Sorry, I was just glancing in the guys, I should tell you, I'm streaming to 3 different platforms. You're only going to see the comments from the platform that you're on. That's just a limitation of StreamYard. It doesn't cross the chats. It amalgamates them for me so I can see what's going on, but you can only see what's on your platform. It's a reason to maybe go back and you don't have to watch the show again, but just scroll through and see what maybe other people are talking about on YouTube if you're watching it on Into the Outer Realms or Facebook and so on and so forth here. They're calling these now cross-domain transmedium threats. Interesting. Transmedium, water, air, space. Cross-domain, interdimensional? That's what we think. So that's kind of pretty cool. And this new is going to replace the former unidentified aerial phenomena task force. Kind of clunky there. This is section 1683 of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2022. This has brought all the talking heads out. As I've said, it's been fascinating to watch this stuff. I've spent hours doing it the past couple of weeks. So it's going to supplant the AOIMSG. It's going to supplant the AARO, which was just as recent as July 2022. And now a month later, they're scrapping it. So there you go. And they're going to have something called the Unidentified Aerospace Undersea Phenomena Joint Program Office. Okay, this becomes super important. Here's all the people. Now, you got to keep in mind everything that I've said in the past hour, and I know it's a lot, but listen to this. The Central Intelligence Agency, National Security Agency, Department of Energy, National Reconnaissance Office, Air Force Space Force, Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Who's missing from here, guys? Ultra terrestrials is a good, I like that. I call them interdimensionals. We learned that from Rosemary Ellen Guiley, our mentor, and we sort of picked that up. But I think ultra terrestrials is a great name. And I believe that that is what John Keel was calling them all the way back in the 1970s, ultra terrestrials. So you can't really do better than John Keel. So one more time, guys, here we go. Central Intelligence Agency, National Security Agency, Department of Energy, National Reconnaissance Office, Air Force Space Force, Defense Intelligence Agency, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Who is missing from this list? I'll give you a hint. They've been at the forefront of this study since 1939. So go ahead and put it in the chat room. Supposedly, the group would need to be established no later than 180 days after the enactment of the bill. So we're certainly going to keep a close eye on this. And here's a very important part. It is filled, and everybody's talking about this. It is filled with immunity language for whistleblowers. Non-disclosure agreements don't count. The penalties, the loss of benefits, losing your job, all that goes out the window. If you have a story to tell to Congress, they are setting up mechanisms for you to do so. And my understanding, listening to people like Gary Nolan is, and I think even maybe James Fox, is that even defense contractor employees can go. This is huge. This is Congress going, we want to know the truth. Now, how much is going to come back to us? How much is going to get warped? Why is this being done public, but it could potentially stay private? We don't actually know here, but they're really making it worthwhile for whistleblowers to come out and do this kind of stuff because they're talking about, and here's the language again, adversarial advancements. They do want prior people from the UAPTF, the task force that was just recently set up. They do want those people involved. So it's really cutting out some of the middlemen and going to direct reporting with some of this. It was huge in an era where nothing is bipartisan anymore. It's like pulling teeth. You have Republicans and you have Democrats. You have Blunt, Rubio, Gillibrand, and Heinrich are all at the forefront of this kind of thing. And another interesting thing, the big problem with this here, this unclassified 9-page document that was kind of garbage, was we're only going back 10 or 15 years or maybe 20 years. No. They are saying you need to go back to 1947. Go back to 1947 with the establishment of the Atomic Energy Commission, January 1947. This is when Byrd is steaming down to Antarctica to maybe have a battle with Draco reptilians and Nazis. This stuff sounds a little less crazy than it used to because so many people now are saying it. So that was that. Then another thing comes out August 23rd, that really puts a lot of light on this. Congress admits UFOs not man-made. And again, this language, the threats, the fear agenda is increasing exponentially. So there's an addendum to the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2023. This is the budget that governs the clandestine services. So that whole list, no one's come out and said, so I will tell you guys, the United States Navy. The United States Navy isn't there. So the one collecting the bulk of the data isn't even on this list. It's right there if you look at it. If you look at what's missing, you can see what's going on here. So again, the cross-domain transmedium threats. That's exciting. They're coming from other dimensions possibly, and they can go water, air, and space. They're saying this. They are only interested in looking at stuff that is not human in origin. If it's human in origin, we're not interested in it. So what falls in their lap has to, by definition, come out as unidentified aerospace undersea phenomena. Exactly. Because we have film. more and more film of these things going into the water, skimming the water, going into the water, coming out of the water. There's out of Puerto Rico, there was a customs plane that got this thing where this thing zips across, goes down into the water, comes back out, and splits in two. And you can kind of see that pretty well on that particular thing. Marco Rubio, vice chair of the Senate Select Committee, says publicly he wants the UFOs to be aliens and not foreign weapons. That is interesting. Let me read that to you again. Marco Rubio, vice chair of the Senate Select Committee, publicly said he wants the UFOs to be aliens and not foreign weapons. That is very cool. But hey, we would rather deal with extraterrestrials, ultra terrestrials, interdimensionals, ETs than with the Russian government. That's pretty cool. And that's potentially telling. That's someone pretty up who that doesn't quite jive with the fear agenda there. Because Reagan said, right, to the UN famously, if suddenly we were confronted by this, how things would change, how the world would come together in a hurry. And please remember that Reagan, when he was governor, said that he witnessed a UFO. So there's just a couple more things I want to tell you. Fear propaganda. That's exactly it. That's exactly what's going on. Let me put this up here. They love to breadcrumb us. What I'm trying to do is give you what looks sort of like a whole loaf of bread. Now, it may have some air pockets in it, which all great bread does. I'm Italian, Sicilian. I want to say that you need some air pockets in your bread there. But try to give you this. Hold them together. Make a little with breadcrumbs. My grandmother used to make, when she was frying stuff, these little breadcrumb patties. They were wonderful. My Sicilian's coming up a little. I apologize over here. Also, they can travel to and from with and without their technology. Yes, they can. Wes Roberts is going to be back on the show, and we're going to talk about the psychic dimension of what's going on with them by location. There are some interesting theories that they are psychic spaceships. They become nuts and bolts in our dimension, and then they go back to psychic. That's interesting. That tech, I'm not sure that we have that tech, but it's out there. So thank you for joining us and for contributing so much tonight, Jennifer. So last thing I want to tell you about here tonight is a guy named Gary Nolan. He's an immunologist from Stanford. Now, I watched him. Reverend Carter sent me this. I don't typically watch Tucker Carlson, but he was on Tucker Carlson today, early August 2022, when all of this stuff was breaking, right in between those two articles that are shared with you. So in 2011, Gary Nolan, this very esteemed immunologist, creating blood testing, cancer testing equipment that's been sent out proprietary. Now, remember, Stanford is one of those places. Stanford Research Institute, not affiliated with Stanford University, but still, Stanford University is one of those places like Harvard and other places that has been a hotbed for this kind of research for a long time. In 2011, the CIA and an unnamed defense contractor show up at his office, and they say that we have these 100 cases of people who we think have been exposed to UFOs, and they have medical damage, and we heard you're the guy to talk to. And there had been deaths due to this exposure. They show the MRIs on Tucker Carlson. You can go out and find this from August of 2022. The white matter in the brain looks like something from MS. My mom happens to have, and they don't know why, a large amount of white matter in her brain that causes balance and perception, some other issues. The radiation burns. One of the Rendlesham Forest personnel, I talked about Nick Redfern doing a very interesting thing. Rendlesham is one of these big, interesting cases in the lore. A man named John Burroughs, and he was not named in the show, so I had to dig because John McCain had to come out and get him benefits. Sounds an awful lot like the MK Ultra stuff we were talking about. That's how we found out that the medical center, and it's escaping me, in Maryland that we were talking about, Edgewood Army, the Edgewood Research Center there, was part of MK Ultra because of these lawsuits that were brought to get these guys who have a variety of cognitive problems and physical problems because of the drugs and gases they were exposed to, benefits that they need. So this John Burroughs got the benefits he needed. He has permanent heart trouble from being in proximity to these Rendlesham things. Nolan, who's a pretty good insider, and I came to find out does a lot of this UFO stuff. It was fairly tame, as you could imagine, for Tucker Carlson, because that's mainstream news there. They looked at 100 cases, and he found out that 90 of them were probably Havana syndrome. Craig and I talked about Havana syndrome on our MK Ultra show, and we talked about it even more, if you're interested, on the Manson Mitchell show a week later, the national radio show we were invited on to talk about MK Ultra. We talked about Havana syndrome even more. But 10 of the cases seem to be related to people in proximity to landed UFOs. This is interesting. And Nolan believes that the harm was inadvertent because of the technology and what these ships are putting out, and not because anyone was intentionally harmed. Okay, how does this all come together? Because I kept you a little longer than I wanted to here. Okay. In May of 2022, so about 4 or 5 months ago, so we're keeping current here, Wisconsin Representative Mike Gallagher, right? House Intelligence Committee has 2 people testifying in front of him. One of them is Ronald Moultrie, who's a top Pentagon intelligence guy, and Scott Bray, who's the Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence. Naval, that is not on this very long list of who is going to be reporting directly to Congress. Navy gets a pass somehow. We're going to keep a really close eye on that. He asks Moultrie and Bray specifically about the glowing red orb that I told you about, the 1967 incident at Malmstrom Air Force Base with the ICBMs. And they have no idea about this thing. They have no idea. These guys are top intelligence guys, and they have no idea that there was this very serious report by serious people who had already testified in front of Congress saying that these 10 ICBMs, somehow these 2 top intelligence guys are not aware, but we'll look into it. Congressman, we'll be happy to look into it. Then Gallagher does something really interesting, which I sort of question. And this is why, again, the dangers of disclosure. And this is the problem that I think with the Oak Islands and with the Skinwalker Ranch and these shows. They seem to push the most incredulous narratives. That's what they focus on because it's entertainment. In this case, I think it's disclosure. So listen to this. He brings up to these 2 gentlemen something called the 2002 Wilson Davis Memo. Wilson is Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson, and Davis is Eric Davis, who, you know, if you watch these shows, if you're clued into this lore, you know Eric Davis. He's a physicist, and he's worked for all kinds of organizations. He's really out there. Apparently, this is a memo between the 2 of them about secret government organizations that are reverse engineering alien technology. It's highly, highly controversial, again, because like MJ-12, if it's true, this is highly problematic in any kind of burying of the truth when these kinds of things and these kinds of resources come out into the light. And I have to tell you, I'm very disappointed. There was a guy who initially got the MJ-12 information, and I knew someone who knew that person. And for a split second, I thought I was going to be able to get him on the show, but he's been humiliated and all so much that he wants absolutely nothing to do with it. So that's for his safety and all. But we have to understand how they tried to bury Bob Lazar, how they maybe poisoned this guy, Stan Myers. What did happen to Forrestal? What did happen to Frank Olson with the LSD? Got dosed, jumped out a window. Was he pushed because he was going to go and talk about the fact that you can't do this kind of thing to citizens of the United States? We don't know, but the list is fairly long here. Davis worked for 6 months at Skinwalker Ranch. He's a senior project engineer at the Airspace Corp, which is government funded. This guy is an insider. Yes, Jennifer, exactly. Bob Lazar was definitely talking about this reverse engineering, so it's out there. So many people think that this Wilson Davis memo is a hoax. Why would Gallagher bring this up? Because the minute you start talking about stuff which could potentially be a hoax and so many people think are a hoax, people turn off the TV. They go, this is junk, this is nonsense, you're wasting my time, I don't want to hear it. Of course, these guys pleaded ignorance, didn't know what it was, probably thought it was BS. But why do you, if you have these top guys in front of you, why do you waste time until you have, and I'm not saying that the Wilson Davis memo is a hoax, but until you have more research, more people, because Eric Davis isn't talking about it, and Vice Admiral Wilson denies that the thing exists, and Eric Davis is just staying mum. So why would you bring that up? That always tweaks my ear up. It always perks it up. I just want to bring this up now. I'm watching an absolutely fascinating, it's on Concrete, Koncrete, with the eminent UFO filmmaker and researcher James Fox. I have endless amounts of respect for James Fox. But after he made I Know What I Saw about his National Press Club, where he brought 15 people from 7 countries to talk about UFO encounters that they had, Bigelow has lunch with him. And he says, look, have you thought about the ramifications of disclosure? Because our studies say that society is going to collapse. Religion is going to collapse. The economy is going to collapse. This is going to be dangerous. So we have to guard this stuff. We have to guard this stuff. We have to guard this stuff. That is the same garbage that was coming out in 1953 with the Robertson panel. That was the same stuff that was coming out in the 1970s with the Rand report that found the same thing. Ask yourself, are you going to flip out and not be able to deal with life or get out of bed in the morning because we find out that these things are maybe walking amongst us, maybe, or living underneath us, or have bases with ships under the water? All these things that more and more credible people are saying, I say that it's horse crap. I say that it's horse crap. And most of these people are doing the work that they're doing, people like James Fox and Gary Nolan and so forth, because they think like I do that people need to know about this stuff. So the dangers of disclosure, a fear agenda that's going to take money that could be used for a lot of other things and put it into Space Force and all of this other kind of stuff to keep funding the government, to fund the black hats, the people who are in control. Yes, Jennifer, Tanya and I one night got to speak to someone who seemed credible and said that they were a hybrid. And we've talked to people who have gone up into spaceships and seen their children. They knew it. Even though they looked nothing like them, they knew. Just like a mother knows who meets their child for the first time 30 years later. They know there is a connection there. So thank you again for that as well. So folks, what was the whole point of this hour and 21 minutes? This was it. Pay attention. Do your research. Watch these guys, Nolan. I appreciate so much that you're watching me. Continue to watch Craig and I, Three Beards, Reverend Carter. Watch these people. Watch James Fox. James Fox has a new great documentary coming out about a really interesting case in Brazil where supposedly there were bodies. So more data, stuff coming up. James Fox took him 13 years to even look into the case. Now he believes in it so much he's done a documentary. And this stuff is really so important. So watch. And if there should be, and so many people are saying, look, this false flag is coming. It may not be a hologram. It may be something that we've created or we got from the Nazis, or I know Joey sounding like he's gone off the res. But, you know, there's a lot of people saying this stuff. Whatever form, be skeptical. Be skeptical. Do your homework. Don't give it. And the last thing that we could have, because here, this is what I'm going to leave you with. Werner von Braun was talking about, right, the nationalist wars. Of course, we had that, World War II, all of that. Then we had the ideological wars. We had communism, the Cold War, all of that. We had the religious wars in the 90s, 2000, so on and so forth. I talked about all of that, Afghanistan, Iraq, the Islamic State, all of that kind of thing. And then the final card, that's what he called it. The final card was going to be a fake alien invasion. He got everything else right. So I want you to pay attention. Craig nicknames me Argus because I'm watching all the time. And we need to watch. We keep gathering data. Listen to the smart people. Listen to the people who have the access. All I can do is pull the data together and present it to you because I'm watching all these different people. So thank you for watching the show. Sorry I kept you so long. You can go back, you can review this. Love your thoughts and all, especially watch what's going on now with this fiscal bill and what's actually going to happen with this new group with the UAPs, cross domain trans medium. Tanya just got home after doing a contract 6 months out of state. She's finally back home. She's got a great job where she can work right here from the Creative Cottage. So excited. We're going away for the weekend. We're going to go to a bed and breakfast, spend some quality time together in an awesome little town. Jennifer, thank you so much. Come back again. It was awesome. Reed, watch out for the hallway before the final card happens. Yeah, and I'm going to try and get out by the spring. Craig's going to write the intro, but Parallels and Patterns, my lifelong quest for answers. Started when I was a little kid in the confessional, asking a Catholic priest about dinosaurs and Adam and Eve and about how all that works. So I've been doing this for a long time. All right, thank you so much. Couldn't do this without you. I'd just be talking to myself, which is what I do most of the time. But anyway, we'll see you next week. I have something completely different. We're going to have Sandy Hart coming on, talking about the Liminal Odyssey. I went to get the book, and I moved the table so it was out of the camera shot. Then we're going to have the Moon Mysteries. We got really cool stuff coming up. Mark Fiorentina coming back. Wes Roberts is coming back. It's great when they go, I love doing your show. When can I come back? Let's get you back sooner rather than later, because these stories are important. We're going to have Pam Nance on the show, paranormal investigator. We have been emailing like crazy. Les Velez was nice enough to hook me up, and I think she's going to get me a guest. So that's what's happening now. We're going to bring you some cool stuff with some cool people. Keep watching. Of course, Craig and I, Sinister Mysteries. Take care, everyone. Really, I could not literally do this without